Good evening. We begin with the latest in Afghanistan at the airport in Kabul. The crowds are growing and the clock is ticking. The Taliban saying the August 31st deadline is firm. Meanwhile, we're seeing violence, threats, and warnings. The U.S. telling Americans over the weekend to avoid the airport where gunfire has broken out. New threats from ISIS against Americans trying to leave Afghanistan. Afghan security forces exchanged gunfire with unknown attackers at the airport. One of those Afghans was killed. Here, Afghans crowd around the fallen security force member. Local staff at the U.S. Embassy in Kabul are said to be deeply disheartened by the U.S. evacuation efforts, according to a State Department cable obtained by NBC News. And that brings up another contentious element of the operation, using U.S. troops to ensure safe passage of Americans and other allies, like the French, Germans, and the British are doing. In fact, British troops were instrumental in saving a U.S. journalist working for the Washington Post and her colleagues, escorting them through a checkpoint. Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who helped initiate the war in 2001, has now weighed in as well, saying the decision to withdraw was made in obedience to an imbecilic political slogan about ending the forever wars. Another important point here, Britain removed nearly all of its forces in 2014. So where do Americans stand on these developments? Here's comedian Bill Maher reflecting on the relief he felt at first when Americans voted Donald Trump out of office.
And then, oh, thank God, we got him out of office, and the adults are back in charge. The people who know what they're doing, the Democrats with this. And the pullout looks, I can't think of how it could have been any different if it was Trump. Honestly, I mean, how could it be more, how could it be more incompetent?
Well, the latest polls seem to indicate a measure of uneasiness among Americans at best. The White House points out, though, the U.S. has relocated some 42,000 people since July, 37,000 in the last 8 days, 16,000 people in the last 24 hours. Still, President Biden's approval rating has slipped below 50% for the first time. As for his handling of Afghanistan, just 25% approve, 60% disapprove. One other note, the Taliban has made clear there won't be extensions to the August 31st deadline to leave.
Has the Taliban told you that August 31st is the deadline and that you must leave then? Are those communications happening? Is that something you've agreed to with the Taliban?
We've seen the public statements by the Taliban spokesman about their views on the 31st of August. I think we all understand that view.
Meantime, we are seeing images of Taliban fighters posing with what's believed to be U.S. equipment and weapons left behind. The question remains, can the U.S. wrap up this operation essentially in a week as the crowds grow around the airport, with thousands still trying to get out? And that's where we begin tonight. More on trying to get friends out of Afghanistan. Sam Rogers, a veteran of the Afghanistan war, also director of Concerned Veterans for America. He's trying to get his Afghan interpreter out of the country. Rogers' unit lost 40 members, and now he doesn't want to lose this Afghan colleague. Sam Rogers joins us right now. Sam, it's great to have you. We actually quoted one of your tweets at the end of last week about your interpreter, and you just tweeted, he's alive. You're trying to get him out. What's the latest?
That's right, Joe. Thanks for having me, first of all. The situation continues to evolve in Kabul. It seems the processes rotate every 3 to 6 hours. It's been extremely challenging to communicate effectively with translators and their families on the ground. 2 days ago, we were able to get translators out pretty effectively if they were already in the special immigrant visa program. Now, he's with a group that has injured children from a near rush at the gate, and they've struggled to get access to the airfield.
How have you been in touch with him, Sam?
We're utilizing communications applications that provide front and back end security. Taliban checkpoints are searching people's phones for American phone numbers or American text messages. And so it's extremely challenging to make sure that they both keep their operational security tight while staying in communication with us.
Sam, the tweet we quoted of you last week talked about how much this interpreter meant to you. In fact, it sounded like he saved your life, in essence.
Absolutely. It was probably the second firefight of my first deployment, and a lot of people were wounded. and he was just punching me in the back of my armor, yelling, "There's one in the tree." And I looked over right before a man up in a pomegranate tree over the top of a wall opened fire on my soldier and I, and were able to neutralize him before he killed us.
Do you have any doubts that he'll get out, Sam?
A little bit. There's a ton of really incredible nonprofits in the country right now working diligently to get folks together into safety. They're buttoned up tight right now, but with injured children, we don't know if they'll be able to get to the airfield unless there's a means of physical transportation through the gate. And I just don't know if that's going to be provided.
Well, we're wishing him and you and everyone who's trying to get people out all of the best. It's an interesting story to follow on Twitter. It's at Real Sam Rogers. We'll continue to follow you on Twitter, Sam, and stay in touch. Will you let us know how it goes?
Absolutely. I sure will, Joe. Thanks so much.
You bet. Thank you. Sam Rogers, former intelligence officer and a veteran of the Afghanistan war. Again, thank you. We appreciate it. So what about Afghans who have been lucky enough to get to the airport and escape the Taliban? I wanted to introduce you to someone now standing in this picture beside former President George W. Bush. It's someone NewsNation host Ashley Banfield knows well. For the safety of his family, we're blurring his face, but he was Ashley's translator in Afghanistan when she reported there. He went on to work for the U.S. government. Although he lives in the United States now, his family remained behind until just 2 days ago. This is his family at the airport after several attempts to get to safety. They are now in Qatar en route to the United States. And Ashley Banfield is with us now with more on this story. Ashley, the thing that's incredible about you is you have so many personal connections to so many stories, but this one seems like it's different in a lot of ways because this one runs deep for you.
It does. So on my show for the last week, I've been telling our viewers, Joe, that I'm part of this digital Dunkirk that you've heard about. So many people with connections to Afghans who helped us, either helped journalists or helped military. We're all uniting in these little groups all over the world, and I have a little group. And so I asked people to forgive my frustration last week as I covered this disaster that's been unfolding, because all the while, my little group of military and a few people in the media business were desperate to get Jawad's family out. I'm not using his real name because obviously you saw that picture. He was as high level as you get. He was with our president, the president of the United States. Right. So for that service, he needed help. And that family of his was trapped in a safe house, going from safe house to try to evade the Taliban. And I will tell you this, Joe, the Taliban found them. They broke into his mother's house last week and they had this picture and they said, "Where is he?" And they beat up his brother-in-law and said they're coming back. And so they were clearly on a target list. And CNN is reporting today the first execution that they could confirm, or at least a sentence, a death sentence for the brother of a translator. So my digital Dunkirk team got together. We worked really tirelessly all of last week. And I am happy to report that we were able to effectuate this. It's important to know, Joe, this is one family, and there are hundreds of them. And it took unbelievable maneuvers to get them not just to that airport. They tried 5 times and could never get through the gate. It took an additional maneuver. It took an extraction. It took something like a special operation to get them at their safe house and get them into that airport because they were so terrified to go through any more checkpoints of Taliban, lest their names be discovered and they all be arrested and condemned to die. Well, that is just amazing insight from someone right there in the middle of it. Ashley, I know you'll have much more on this on your show tonight. You can catch it right here on NewsNation. Ashley runs at 10 Eastern. Actually, Joe, can I just tell one more thing? Sure. It's going to be the team. You're going to meet that digital Dunkirk group, and you're going to meet the translator on our program tonight at 10 Eastern, 9 Central. We'll look forward to that. Ashley, thanks for your time. You bet. For more on this, let's turn now to Representative Brian Mast, Republican of Florida. Congressman Mast served in Afghanistan as an Army bomb disposal expert, a duty that tragically cost him his legs. Congressman, I know you just finished up a vote. We've worked hard to get you on. We've pushed you down. We're glad to get you in. Let's start with this deadline that we've heard so much about. Do you think the U.S. can get this job done in essentially 8 days?
I don't think that we can get this done in the right way in 8 days. When you look at the vetting that needs to be done, the way we sort through people, where Americans are spread out to, who they're mixed in with, the Americans that haven't had the opportunity to get in contact with somebody in the right way, that maybe had to change locations in order for their safety. When you layer all of these things on top of the fact that every minute that goes by, the Taliban have a better understanding of the capabilities that they now have because of the high ground that they have, because of the way that we are encircled, and because of the quote unquote most advanced military weaponry that they now have in their hands, as President Biden stated.
It seems to me, Congressman, like we could say, look, we've been here 20 years. We're invested in this thing. We're on our way out. We'll leave when we're finished. Is that an option or no?
It's absolutely an option, but that comes from negotiating from a position of strength. The Taliban fundamentally do not want to seem weak. Remember, this is warlord lined up in front of another warlord, lined up in front of another warlord that's competing to say who's going to get to measure the drapes in Kabul. Now, whichever one comes up as the baddest warlord is ultimately going to be the one that takes control. If they go out there and say, no, okay, we'll give you an extra 8 days, we'll give you an extra month, that's not going to be the one that gets to measure the drapes, and that's what they're ultimately concerned about.
I want to play a clip for you, Congressman, if I can, from Army General Stephen Lyons, the Transportation Command General, talked about how U.S. troops are doing there today. Here's the clip. We'll talk after.
I won't lie to you, they're tired. They're probably exhausted in some cases. They are motivated, they are fired up, and they are committed to complete this mission.
Congressman, you earned the Bronze Star, the Medal for Valor, the Purple Heart. What are you seeing with your trained eye that maybe the rest of us might not be seeing?
Look, you have surrounding that airport the most capable individuals anywhere in the world. Your Army Rangers, your Marines, your Special Operations Forces there, the 82nd Airborne Division on a quick response force action, the most capable individuals. They can execute whatever it is that they are unleashed to go out there and execute, but that is the fundamental question there, and it's been the question for what are we on day 11 of this hostage crisis? It's been the fundamental question since the beginning. What are they authorized to go out there and unleash? How far can they push that perimeter? What are their rules of engagement? Are they going to really focus, as the White House has said, in making sure that this appears not to be a combat mission? And when you layer those kind of optical objectives on top of this already dangerous mission, it's a bad situation for our service members.
Congressman, I can't think of a better person to ask than you, considering what you've sacrificed in this war. But I'm sure you've seen the poll that finds a lot of Americans think this war was not worth it. Do you look at that in a way that maybe they're focusing on this exit versus the successes that you and your troops had there and that America had in this war?
There's a lot of success that was had to keep that war on terror, the battlefield, from being America's highways, Americans' roadways, America's malls and shopping centers and restaurants. And that's the truth. But I think the question needs to be phrased just a little bit differently. The question Americans asking are, is it worth it now? Is it worth it now that all of that blood, sweat, and tears, the blood of those that I served alongside, the sweat of those that went over there year after year, and the tears of the families that saw their loved one be buried in Arlington or somewhere else, since that's been pissed away, is it worth it? And here's the other side of the answer.
Congressman? Was it worth it to you, seeing how it's ending here?
This is the answer that I would give to that. When the guys ran across a minefield to save my life, they did it because of their brother to their left and right. When I move across a field getting shot at by machine gun fire to get to one of my brothers, that's because of my brother to my left and right. That can never be taken away from any one of my service members. It's what makes it worth it entirely to me. I'd never trade for 1 minute, 2 legs and a finger for any one of my brothers to my left and right. They were worth it every second, every moment, and they'd be worth a hell of a lot more.
Well, that's a powerful way to send us out. Congressman Brian Mast, Republican from Florida and Afghanistan war veteran. Again, thank you for joining us. I know it was not easy. Appreciate your time.
All the best.
More drama on the southern border after the Supreme Court temporarily halts a case to reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy. But how long will it last as migrants come in record numbers? More on that ahead. And violence erupts in Portland, Oregon over the weekend between far left and far right groups, a bad sign for a city that's been ground zero for a lot of violent protests. And don't forget, you can follow us on social media at The Donlon Report on Twitter. The Remain in Mexico policy could be making a comeback. A lower court ordered the Biden administration to bring that policy back last week, and it's been tied up in the courts since. And it's now made its way to the Supreme Court, which is temporarily blocking the reinstatement of that Trump-era policy. The suspension could end tomorrow night, though. Joining me now for more on this, Chris Cabrera, Vice President of National Border Council, Rio Grande Valley Border Sector. Chris, it's good to see you again. Let's talk about this Supreme Court decision possibly tomorrow. If the case holds up and this has to go back in and it's reinstated, how would that change what the Border Patrol is doing on the ground?
You know, assuming it goes back in the way it was with the last administration, it'll help us out a great deal. Back in December, you know, our numbers were a lot lower. It's a big deterrent, so people know they're getting turned around and going right back home, regardless of what they say. Unfortunately, right now they're taking advantage of this loophole and they're just coming over like you wouldn't believe.
How did it work with the previous administration, Chris? So when this was just asylum seekers, is that right?
Well, you know, right now, yeah, everybody, well, it's actually everybody. Everybody that comes over, they're getting returned to their country. If they have some type of claim as far as asylum, then they wait in Mexico pending the adjudication of their claim. So the folks that we're claiming, you know, a lot of those cases, the vast majority, probably 90%, are bogus claims, and so they don't hold any merit. So they just don't even waste the money for the trip, knowing that they're not going to get away with crying wolf.
What about unaccompanied minors? Would they still be allowed in then?
You know, with the last administration, we were sending back unaccompanied minors as well. You know, depending on what country they were from, we would send them back wherever they came from.
So how would this, let's just say again, Chris, for the sake of this discussion, that this is reinstated. In addition to Title 42 and then Remain in Mexico, who did come in under the Trump administration?
You know, people that you know, it was, people still came, but mainly the ones we were catching were the ones that were trying to evade detection. And that traffic is always there. Unfortunately, right now, as it stands, we don't have anybody to work that because everybody's tied up with these babysitting duties and these false claims. So we're still going to have people that are always trying to come in. It's just, you know, that's a different group than what we're seeing turning themselves in mass numbers.
What do you think this would do in real numbers, Chris, as far as people crossing? I know you had 212,000 encounters in July alone. If the Remain in Mexico policy is reinstated, what would that do to the numbers?
You know, if history is anything, I think it would cut that number down to a bare minimum. I think that the bigger question here is Mexico going to cooperate with the Remain in Mexico policy? I think that's the $1 million question right there.
Right. Is that to you one of the biggest issues, is the asylum question and how to deal with people who are seeking asylum in the U.S.?
Yeah, you know, there's got to be a better system than what we have in place right now. It's easier to come in the country illegally than it is legally. And the asylum system is so complex and burdensome. It takes years to get it done. If they were to put some of these immigration judges or asylum officers at the front end of this process and start vetting immediately, as opposed to waiting months and months and sometimes years to get started, I don't think we'd be in the situation we're in now.
Right. I don't know if you know the answer to this, Chris, but of the 212,000 encounters that you had in July, how many of those include people who are crossing illegally, and how many of them, let's just say rough percentage numbers, are trying to cross at a port of entry?
At the port of entry, it's, you know, I think they're probably maybe 20%, 30%. Yeah, okay. And the simple fact is it's easier to do it the illegal way and get rewarded than do it the legal way and go through the cumbersome process.
Well, because if you do it the illegal way and you do make it across without getting caught, you don't have to seek asylum or anything else, correct? You're in.
Yeah, you're in. You get you get free passage. You get some paperwork giving you temporary status and enough to get to a sanctuary city and just disappear.
All right. Now, there's also a lawsuit that's been filed by the West Virginia Attorney General because of all of the fentanyl that we have seen come in. The AG claiming that this is tied to the Remain in Mexico policy being removed by the Biden administration. What are you seeing now with fentanyl coming in?
You know, we see a lot of illegal drugs that come in. Unfortunately, like I said, our manpower isn't out there to interdict a lot of this. I think that's what the rest of the country needs to understand is most people think that that's a border problem and, it's those guys down there that have to deal with it. But whether it's the people coming in or the drugs that are coming in, they're not staying here in this area. We don't have opiate problems down here. We don't see anybody, large scale heroin use or meth use or any of that. It doesn't stay down here. So people in the rest of the country need to realize that this is not necessarily a border issue as it is for the rest of the country.
If the numbers were to stay as they are now, we looked them up last week, Chris, and there are just short of 20,000 Border Patrol agents, if I'm correct. I think you did correct me on that. But the number you think we would need if Remain in Mexico does not get reinstated, how many would you like to have?
Yeah, Border Patrol agents, honestly, I know the number differs from agent to agent, but I think if you just let us do our job, and fix these loopholes in the system, I don't think we need anybody else. Just let us do what we do.
Interesting. Chris Cabrera, Vice President of the National Border Council, Rio Grande Valley Border Patrol Sector. Chris, thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
The Afghans at risk eligible for special immigrant visas and other categories of support from the U.S. government. We are trying to get as many of them to the airport as quickly as possible to get them on flights home.
The administration says they're doing everything they can to get U.S. allies out of Afghanistan. With new terror concerns, though, how is the U.S. vetting new arrivals? That story coming up. As the crisis in Afghanistan unfolds, there is growing criticism of how the president is handling it. A new poll from NBC showed Mr. Biden's approval numbers have slipped below 50%. For the first time. Another poll from the Associated Press says 51% of Americans disapprove of the president's foreign policy overall. There are fears of a resurgence of terrorist groups like ISIS, and thousands are still waiting to make it out of Afghanistan. Jason Beardsley joins us now. He's the National Executive Director of the Association of the Navy and a frequent guest on the show. Jason, great to have you again. Let's start with this deadline. Do you think we can get this done in 8 days?
Well, I liked Congressman Mast's answer. It's very difficult to get it done right in 8 days. But make no mistake, if the United States really amplifies the operations from a military perspective, it is doable. But again, to his point, it's very complex at this point to do it well. Getting the Afghans out, our allies there, seems like that's going to be a much heavier lift. That is gut-wrenching for a lot of folks to watch. We've worked with a lot of these folks. They're phenomenal assets on the ground. I have friends that have local nationals. I heard your report with Ashley Banfield, and it is gut-wrenching, again, to watch as these local nationals are struggling. We have American citizens. Some have made it in the wire. Visa holders. Some have made it in the wire, special immigrant visas. But there's a whole nother category of folks on the ground that right now are going to be top-tier targets for any terrorist or violence activities once the Taliban takes over and, God forbid, an ISIS Khorasan group sort of inserts themselves. What do you make of the latest ISIS threats, Jason? I think the State Department has this one right, or Jake Sullivan, that these are very dangerous. They have to monitor them closely. This is a very chaotic situation. The real truth is, the State Department and those involved in the planning of this should not have put us in this situation, because now coming out of it is much more complex. Whether we bring in military forces or not, it gets more dangerous by the hour. So what have we learned here, Jason? I mean, the Mike Tyson line sort of comes to mind. Everyone has a plan until you get punched in the mouth. But, now we've left all this military equipment there. We've got Humvees and helicopters and planes and drones. That's all there. Should we have maybe gotten the people out before the military left? What have we learned in the end here about this exit strategy? Well, this lesson learned is going to hurt really bad. I represent Association of the United States Navy. That's Marines, that's Navy. These are folks that have been on the ground for years telling us how we need to get out of there, which is, number one, that we can't waste our time with the equipment. We have to get that out before the diplomats came out. And when we left Bagram Airfield, when we left Kandahar or Kabul Airfield, and then we left our diplomats to fend for themselves, that was a mistake. So one of the lessons we've learned here is the Department of Defense can do this very well. The military knows how to evacuate diplomats. But when you put this in the hands of state, diplomatic, demarches and notes and spokespersons from the State Department trying to plan a military exfil like this, that's not the right place to do it. So one of the things we learned is let the military do what the military does well. All right.
Listen, Jason Beardsley, it's always great to have your voice. We appreciate the time. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's turn now to NewsNation correspondent Marky Martin. She joins us now with more on what we've been hearing about the vetting process for these Afghan refugees and how the airlines are now helping. Marky?
Yeah, hey, Joe. So on Sunday, the Pentagon invoking the Civil Reserve Air Fleet program, which has rarely been done. And Joe, when I say rarely, I mean this is the third time in 70 years that this has happened. So this is basically the government coming forward to these carriers saying, hey, we need a helping hand. We need airplanes. You've got the airplanes. So it's 6 or 7 carriers who are offering up 18 of their planes here. And I will say, just right off the top, they're not operating in and out of Kabul, but rather these third-party safe haven countries. And those countries range everywhere from Germany, Italy, Spain, Kuwait, Bahrain. And some of those carriers include American, Delta, United, Hawaiian, Atlas Air, Air Transport, and also Southwest Airlines as well. And we're told these companies are going to be doing these flights for about 1 to 2 weeks. And, you know, we reached out to a lot of them and said, what does this process look like behind the scene? How are you vetting all of these refugees, these passengers coming forward? And, Joe, it seems the common denominator in responses is we're not sharing protocols. These are Department of Defense flights. We can't share much here. But those flights did start today. And for anybody, for Americans who might be worried or concerned about what that vetting process actually looks like, here's a message from President Biden.
At these sites where they're landing, we are conducting thorough scrutiny, security screening for everyone who is not a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident. Anyone arriving in the United States will have undergone a background check.
And just to reiterate, those American flights did start today, and the president even adding over the weekend that he could be extending that withdrawal deadline from August 31st beyond, but we'll have to stay tuned to see what really happens there. Joe.
It is a pressing question. Marky Martin, thanks for the update. Aside from our Afghan allies, there is concern for Afghan women who would almost certainly face discrimination and oppression under Taliban rule. The Taliban has vowed to respect women's rights, but there are already reports of women being beaten, abused, and even killed. Marina Amiri joins us now. She is a senior fellow at NYU with contacts on the ground in Afghanistan. Marina, let's start with you, as we have with a couple of our guests here, on this August 31st deadline. Do you think that should be something we are able to move?
No, it's an arbitrary, yes, absolutely, we should move it. It's an arbitrary deadline. It's not based on conditions. It's being set as terms by the Taliban when they have violated the agreement. And we need to get everyone that needs to get out, everyone who's under threat, out. That should be the condition.
Yeah,
not what the Taliban asks us.
Exactly, and that's been the challenge, no question. We talked a lot here about women, and I know that's something that you have focused on. We're already hearing from activists who are sharing just horrible stories. What is your biggest concern moving forward?
I have several concerns. One, women have been silenced overnight. The fact that I'm speaking to you rather than an Afghan woman from inside the country is very telling. They are articulate, they're powerful, they are strong, but right now they are hiding, they're in shelters, they are terrified, and they are not speaking up anymore. And that is such a, I think it's not only bad for Afghanistan, but, you know, there has been blood and treasure invested in Afghanistan. And now that the troops are leaving, but we said that we would sustain the gains. You cannot sustain the gains when the population that was advancing those gains have to flee. And so one is the issue of these human rights defenders and their fate. Right now, they cannot, I can tell you, we will not get all of these people out by August 31st because they're the third priority on the list. And then the women and men who are left inside the country, and what will happen to them. That will also require the administration to really hold the Taliban accountable for what they've said. They are going to allow those rights to be maintained.
Right. For the younger generation in Afghanistan, this is pretty much the only country they've known with a U.S. influence and an Afghan government. For people who don't really understand the impact of how life is going to change under Taliban rule, we've seen pictures already, just even of beauty salons where people have painted over the pictures of women. How will life change there under Taliban rule?
I want you to think about just life over here. It wasn't dramatically different than here. People voted. People criticized their politicians. They had music stations. They were engaged in social media. They were activists. And suddenly, all of that's gone. This is all they've known. 65% of the population is under 20. And suddenly, this force that is alien to them, that is not representing Afghan culture to them, has taken over, and they're terrified that their life and their rights are gone as they've known it.
Well, we can hear the concern and the passion in your voice. Marina Amiri, it's great to have you with us tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Violence erupts in Portland over the weekend between far-right and far-left groups, plus a rogue shooter on the streets of downtown. I'll speak with a reporter who was there next. And it's New York Governor Andrew Cuomo's last day in office. From the face of COVID to sexual harassment allegations, it's been a ride. What's next for him and the Empire State? Next.
When government politicizes allegations and the headlines condemn without facts, you undermine the justice system. A firecracker can start a stampede, but at one point everyone looks around and says, why are we running? The Attorney General's report was designed to be a political firecracker on an explosive topic, and it worked.
That was New York Governor Andrew Cuomo's farewell speech hours before he steps down following weeks of political turmoil in response to Attorney General Letitia James's report alleging he sexually harassed 11 women. Joining me now, New York State Assemblyman Mike Matasano. Mike, last day in office for the governor. How did that speech go over there in New York?
Well, not well from what I could tell. I think it wasn't well received, and he was seen, as a narcissist. He's making himself the victim once again.
Yeah, did you expect him to maybe at least take some ownership in what had happened, or no?
Well, I would have liked him to do that, but that's not his nature or his personality. He's never wrong. It's always everybody else that's attacking him.
So what's next for the Empire State?
Well, we're looking forward to the swearing in of Governor Hochul tonight at midnight, and, for the policies that she'll set forth, her own agenda. She's considered to be a moderate. She's down the middle, and she's serious in what she does. And I think she's going to be a great asset to us in moving the state forward on our government policies forward.
What are her biggest challenges, in your opinion, moving forward?
Well, right now she's going to be working with a stripped down state agencies. The health department has lost over 60 employees in recent times, and a lot of them were, had a lot of experience and internal knowledge how to run the health department, and a lot of them were scientists and, researchers, so that's a critical issue. And then some of the other state agencies have been bleeding personnel, and she has to build her own executive office. So she has that to deal with coming out of the box. And then, COVID, there's a little bit of a resurgence going on. There's dealing with mask issues, vaccination issues, and landlords and tenants have a big problem because the funding that was given to them by the federal government has been held back by the government, as well as the money being allocated in May for the people with disabilities in the residential homes has been withheld. So those are the urgent matters, as she begins, in my opinion.
So the impeachment effort against Governor Cuomo was basically tabled, I guess, for legal reasons, or at least there was some legal analysis that thought that the Constitution didn't allow for that, someone who is out of office. Are you okay with that?
No, I'm not, because when that research came back, which is legitimate research, we still had 10 or 12 days to file articles of impeachment against the governor, and we should have. Maybe we wouldn't have gone to trial because he would be out of office by then. But in the last 12 days, we could have impeached him and made that as part of his record, for going forward. So in my opinion, he was given a pass.
The benefit would be what? That he couldn't run again if he were impeached?
Well, you would need a conviction after trial, but it would just taint, his record, and he'd have to live with it for the rest of his life, that he was the second governor in the history of the state of New York to be impeached.
What about some of these other issues, Assemblyman, from the nursing home situation to the money for the book? That all goes away now?
No, absolutely not. In fact, we're still reviewing evidence on that matter. And if you notice in the comments his attorney always made, he always narrowed it to the sexual harassment allegations. He never once mentioned, or she never once mentioned, these are the allegations that are pending, and they're extremely serious allegations. And in fact, not only are we investigating, but the Attorney General now opened a criminal investigation into it, and there's several United States Justice Department investigations pending.
All right. Well, meantime, it's a new start for New York, midnight tonight. New York State Assemblyman Mike Matasano, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Hundreds of people took part in opposing demonstrations in Portland, Oregon yesterday, leading to violent clashes over their differing ideology. Some protesters attending a far-right rally identified as Proud Boys, and some of those attending a far-left counter-protest identified as Antifa. The violence spurred chaos in the city, some demonstrators attacking vehicles, lighting fireworks, firing paintball guns, and even macing each other. Joining me now, Daily Caller reporter Jorge Ventura. He was on the ground in Portland during this conflict yesterday. Jorge, we've certainly seen this before, and these often end in violence and problems. This one was a little next level, though.
Yes. So what happened yesterday was both of these groups had planned rallies. The far left group known as Antifa rallied in downtown Portland, and the far-right group known as Proud Boys, they rallied in northeast Portland. When I arrived in downtown Portland, the scenes were already chaotic. There were brawls breaking out. A lot of independent journalists were assaulted as well for filming these far-left groups. That's one thing that's pretty common with Antifa, is they threaten you. They kind of push up umbrellas onto your camera. And I also was able to take a quick video clip of a local reporter and cameraman being chased out of there. And after a few hours there, I went over there to the northeast Portland, northeast Portland side, where the Proud Boys held their rally. As soon as I arrived, according to witnesses, there was a crashed white van there, and according to witnesses on the scene, a left-wing agitator purposely drove into the rally. And according, once again, to the witnesses on the ground, that they took out the individual that was driving that car, assaulted him, bear maced him, and then he was able to make his way out of there. One thing that's kind of surprising throughout the day is just really the lack of law enforcement.
Yeah, we're looking at the video here, Jorge. That's what I was about to ask. Where are the police?
That's what we were asking as well. I mean, this was out in the broad daylight, and these groups are in large numbers, and they clashed right in the open street. Bear mace, weapons were used. A lot of folks on the far right and the far left groups were both armed as well. This could have got actually a lot more dangerous than it was. Some of the Proud Boy members were shooting paintballs onto the ongoing traffic, which was extremely dangerous. But I was really surprised of the lack of law enforcement throughout Portland. It's hard to imagine that Portland PD didn't have any type of intel that this event was going to be happening in their city.
Normally, they have these rallies right next to each other, or at least that's been the case in the past. The police, as I understand, said that they were not getting involved, at least in these initial skirmishes, because they didn't have the resources. Is that what you heard?
We were hearing the same thing, but like I said, it's really hard to imagine that they couldn't have it, that they could have any type of law enforcement presence. Usually, when these type of rallies happen in other major cities, law enforcement is not too far away. They're a block down, just kind of monitoring movements. But we didn't see that at all. I mean, even after the white van was crashed and it was tipped over, and there was even more clashes, no law enforcement arrived at all from what we've seen. The only type of law enforcement we've seen was after the shooting downtown, is when they made a presence downtown. But even then, it was very minimal. I think that was kind of really my biggest takeaway, is just where was law enforcement, knowing that they had the intel that these events were going to be happening.
The other question, Jorge, that people, I'm sure, around the nation who watch these Portland protests have is, what are they protesting? What are they upset about?
To be honest, I wish I could tell you now. It just seems like these groups really are just kind of wasting their time. The far left group seems that they're always angry with something. They one thing I'll always come in here is that they want to overthrow the system. They want to overthrow the government. The far right Proud Boy groups kind of views themselves as kind of the last line of defense for the city of Portland. A big takeaway was last year when the far left groups rioted in Portland for over 100 days.
Right.
Some of those far right groups saw it and don't want to allow that again. But Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's the middle class, working class folks that kind of get caught in the middle of this. A lot of the businesses downtown were shut down today, and I briefly spoke to a business owner who says, I'm already dealing with enough with the COVID and surviving and kind of getting our workers to come back, and having these constant clashes downtown is really not helping us. So it's really just the regular working class, middle class Americans that suffer the most in downtown Portland.
We're up against the clock here, Jorge, but I'm wondering what you can tell us about this shooting that happened right in the middle of downtown. There's video of it. I don't know if that was yours.
Yeah, so the shooting happened downtown. It happened nearby the event or the demonstration held by the far left group. Now, according to local law enforcement, the shooting so far isn't connected to those events. The man that arrested is Dennis Anderson, 65 years old. He shot 7 times with a handgun.
He fired 7 shots, or he was shot 7 times?
He fired 7 shots from his handgun.
Okay. All right. Jorge Ventura with the Daily Caller. Thanks for the recap. We appreciate it. A wild day yesterday in Portland, Oregon. Refugees now arriving in the U.S., and while their trip comes amid chaos in their home country, there are good people doing great things to make them feel at home here. We'll shed some light on some of the positives coming out of this crisis next. Most of the focus on Afghanistan has been at the airport, the beginning of the journey out. Tonight, a look at the final destination here in the U.S. Thousands of Afghan refugees are beginning to arrive, and there's already an effort to make them feel welcome. Christina Baum and others from refugee groups in the D.C. area put together beds for some of the families arriving in the U.S. This is just one of many acts of kindness we've seen emerge from this crisis. On Friday night, we left you with a story of an Oklahoma mother of 11. She helped get an Afghan women's robotics team out of the country using her ingenuity and a friend at the embassy in Qatar. You'll hear from that mother, by the way, Allison Renault, coming up tonight on Prime. And another note about the journey. Among the thousands of people evacuated comes good news from a general running the transportation command. Seems the Stork came along on the exit flight for at least 3 Afghan families. 3 babies were delivered on a plane out of Afghanistan, one on a giant C-17. A fitting story on the way out tonight as we cover boots on the ground to births in the air as well. That is our time for now. Thanks for joining us. Leland's next.